You're listening to Redesigning Reality with Dylan Charles and Jeff Anthony.
All right. This is Redesigning Reality, the podcast. Thank you for tuning in, whoever you are, wherever you are, and whenever you are. I am your host, Dylan Charles, and unfortunately, my co-host, Jeff Anthony, is not here today, and we have been on a long hiatus, some 2.5 months, and so I am super grateful to be back behind the mic here. And it kind of really was an unscheduled and unplanned break. It's kind of as to everything in life, there's a long version and a short version of the story. The short version is I took off to Costa Rica for 2.5 weeks in May, hoping to record while I was down there, but the work that I was doing down there was so engrossing, was so interesting, and so energetically consuming that I did not get around to recording the podcast. And so I broke the chain, and we took a couple of 2.5 weeks off. Now, when I got back, the ball's kind of been in Jeff's court. He's got a lot of family, kind of like ordinary, run-of-the-mill, ho-hum family things going on, like home remodeling, kids out of school for summer, all that kind of stuff. And also had some health issues, which I do believe he's overcoming. All the best to you out there, Jeff. So with any luck, Jeff will be back in the future, but the break kind of snowballed, and so rather than hang out any longer, I thought I'd record a show here and just kind of talk about the future of this podcast, share a little bit of insights with you from my recent trip to Costa Rica, where I was working with the African shamanic plant medicine iboga, talk about that a little bit, because I always love talking about that stuff, and sort of like kind of help redefine what the show is going to be about and what it's going to look like in the future. Now, in the past, you know, we've recorded every week for about 6 months. During that time, we pretty much had this format of Jeff and I get on the horn, unprepared, unplanned, unscripted, and just have a conversation back and forth for about an hour. Now, we've had one guest. We didn't really want to get into guests. Just we have a lot on our minds and really wanted to do this to express what's really happening with us. And so we hadn't gotten into guests that much. And so it was pretty much just a flow, a stream of consciousness conversation between two dudes who like to talk about high-minded stuff above and beyond politics and current events and all that mumbo jumbo and all that stuff that so desperately wants your attention, but talking about what's really happening on the inside with people. And so that format, like I said, we've done that for about 6 months, and now it looks like I may be hosting the show by myself for a while. So I'm not sure how this is going to play out. Not sure exactly what I want the program to look like, but I'm thinking that it's going to change in a few ways. First and foremost, I just need to do audio right now instead of audio and video, because I need to cut down the production time, make it a little easier and quicker to get out the door. And I think I'm going to shorten it up, make it 20, 30 minutes or so, at least for today. And I'm going to try to talk maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, just talk about things that are bubbling below the subconscious of above and below the veil of the collective subconscious mind, if you will. So there's a lot happening in the world today, and the stories, the narratives that are told and spun about it all happen in, different news mediums and news forums. But what's rarely ever told or talked about are the effects of all this information and these ongoing dramatic narratives that always seem to include war, debt, poverty, control, hate, racism, division, money, all of these things. These narratives, these are the big narratives that are constantly at work in the collective consciousness. But below that are the ways that people are affected. There are people suffering from all kind of different challenges and obstacles in life right now, and so many of the news narratives and whatnot aren't really speaking to that, not really working to help people overcome that. And so that's really what I want this show to be about going forward, and really what it's kind of always been about. But still, we'll consider it a personal or a mastermind on personal transformation, because I think that conversation is very much needed right now. So
I'll probably do, like I said, shorter episodes, audio only. Might bring on some guests in the future and have short conversations. Not with like your star-studded podcast guests that everybody's interviewing, but with people that I know, people who are extraordinarily interesting, fascinating, and doing different things or doing things in a different way, and really have cool, inspiring stories to tell. So I'll try to track some of these folks and friends of mine down and see if they just want to have conversations and speak to the world about some of the subtler, more impactful things that are happening in our world today. And so for now, we are kind of on the cusp of, I'm kind of on the cusp of like a great transformation with this podcast. Now, doing it myself, hosting it myself I still consider it quite challenging, and I'd like to overcome this challenge. So like I said, I'm doing this today. This is stepping out into the solo zone, which actually feels pretty good. So we're going to see how it plays out as we go forward. But given that I broke the chain of this podcast in order to go down to Costa Rica, I thought I would start this episode, or I would use this episode to talk a little bit about some of the interesting things that I saw and discovered and learned about myself and other people while I was down there. Now, I am on a slow boat, sort of, if you will, a night school training program to work to become an iboga provider, which is a person who facilitates shamanic plant medicine ceremonies in the tradition of the Bwiti as we know it, working with the Bwiti that we know from Gabon, Africa, which is like Western Equatorial Africa. So like the rainforest, the true rainforest of Africa. So what I'm working towards I'm working towards becoming a provider with a group of individuals I know who work directly with the tribe in Africa. And so we very much study their tradition and how they have applied their tradition to the Western mind, the Western culture. They've taken what they've learned in perhaps thousands of years and brought it to the West, and they are working with people in this culture in order to help them to gain clarity in life, happiness, to overcome challenges, trauma, all sorts of things like that, in order to live a happy life where they feel in control of their themselves and in control of their mind and in control of their own happiness. And it seems simple enough, but just being happy on a day-to-day basis is one of the greatest challenges that really most people face. And so I'm kind of in the long program where when I can get away, when it works out for me economically and time-wise to get away from the family for a little bit, I'll go down there and attend a session or 2 sessions or so. Like this last trip I went down, I was there for 2 sessions. The session is about 8 days. I guess it's 8 days long. And during that time, people come from all over the world. Up to 6 to 7 people come to stay at our center in Costa Rica. And they stay for those 8 days. And during that time, we do 2 traditional all night, all the next day plant medicine ceremonies or iboga ceremonies. And then in between those, we also do a day ceremony in one of the rivers in Costa Rica. It's beautiful. It's called a spiritual shower, and it's an opportunity for them to release things within themselves that are holding them back, to cast aside, that which does not serve them, to like physically and verbally get it out of your body, let it go, and then invite the whatever it is to come to replace that, whatever it is they need to move forward and be better and make a better go at becoming their true selves. So they invite all that back into their lives. And so over the course of a week, with a small group of just 6 to 7 participants, you really can see amazing transformations take place. I mean, when people arrive on day 1, they're in condition A. When they leave when they hit the road to go home the last day, they are in the other end of the spectrum. They are so different than they were when they walked in the door, and we see this every time with every group of people. So now I go down whenever I can to pick up where I left off with this training process. I was down there last year for July, August for a few weeks, and just now got back for another few weeks. And so one of the really interesting things that I'm learning as I transition from a participant, someone who's journeyed with this medicine many times and who's learned a lot from it, who's benefited deeply from it, to someone who helps hold space for others while they go through these dramatic transformations. One of the interesting things I'm learning is that my experience whereas my experience in the past had been purely, from an egocentric perspective, where it was just about me and how these medicines affect me, how I am to translate these messages into my own life, into becoming more of myself. Very egocentric, very much what's happening, what's happened to, what's going to happen with me. And when you only have an egocentric perspective on something, it's difficult to imagine. It's difficult to truly empathize with other people when your sole frame of reference is you as the center of the universe, right? And so in the process of becoming a trainer, a provider, or training to become a provider, one of the first things I've noticed is that for me, as a person who's still learning and growing with this medicine, for me, the experience has almost exponentially increased in the amount of things that I can learn. And this is because I'm now able to be intimately involved with someone else's process. I see how they come in. I see what they're struggling with. I get to know them. I learn about them. I can, I help to facilitate and watch them during the ceremony and see what they go through and help them to kind of understand what's happening and how these events may affect their lives. And then I hold space for them for them to do their own internal work while they're there. And I see them working out these challenges, these problems, overcoming these things. Day by day, you can see almost like a lotus blossom, opening up. Every day it grows a little bit wider and opens a little bit more beautifully. And by the end, it's a full flower. They're very open. They're very very clear-minded, very focused and centered in that side of themselves which seeks the best for themselves. So, that side of themselves which wants to avoid self-destruction, which wants to avoid nihilism and lack of meaning in life. And so it's really fascinating. But as a facilitator, I see everyone that comes in, and I get to experience their transformations as partly as my own in a big way, which is interesting. Now, one of the things I really see that happens when you're in this role of holding space, when you're in this role of being there to support someone's transformation as they work and strive to overcome obstacles, challenges, addiction, all kinds of different things. What I see is, as a person holding space for them, when they walk in the door, I tend to make a presumption of who they are, what they're like. And I see their faces, I shake their hands, or give them a hug or what have you, and I build a story about them for myself without actually hearing much of what they're going through. And what I've noticed is that when the people walk through the door of the wellness center, I tend to look at them and say, "Oh my God, here's another beautiful person in search of soul connection, in search of greater meaning and greater fulfillment in life." These people I look at them and I see beauty and awesomeness and intelligence and creativity, and I just feel really honored to be there for them during this upcoming week. Now, what always happens is over the first day, everybody kind of sits and kind of slowly gets to know each other and, kind of get to meet everybody in the group and kind of get comfortable finding their rooms and finding their spot. But the second day is the day that we do the first ceremony. So when we do the first ceremony, we invite them to open up a little bit about their lives and what brought them here and how they found out about it and what they hope to get out of it. And so what I invariably see is that when people walk in the door, I make a presumption about them that's very high-minded, that's very hopeful, that's very really believes in the best of them. And when you hear what's actually going on inside their own minds a day or so later, you find out that the picture that they have of themselves is typically nowhere near as outstanding and amazing as the picture I have of them. So they're there because they're encumbered by, sour family relationships, or, like I said, addiction to drugs, alcohol, pornography, to dealing with really tough things like being suicidal, like inflicting self-harm, cutting yourself, these kind of things, to even being addicted to, frames of mind, patterns of thinking, concepts and constructions about reality that don't necessarily add up, And so the point here is that the way people see themselves is typically much different and far more negative than the way that other people can see them. So when I'm in the position of holding space, I tend to look outward with love, with openness, with acceptance, with humility at people, but that's not how they look at themselves. And by the end of the week, that completely changes. And this is actually kind of interesting. There was a I think it was a marketing campaign for, it might've been like women's makeup products or something. But the marketing campaign was fascinating because what they did was they had women come in and sit down with a police artist, someone that draws faces of criminals and stuff. And they had this person describe themselves to the police artist, right? And the police artist would sit down and would take the description as they normally would do when solving a crime. And they would, and the artist would draw a picture of this person based on the description that person had of themselves. And then they would bring somebody else into the room, somebody who knew this person and had a totally different perspective. Well, I can't recall if it was a loved one or friends or perhaps even just an acquaintance. And that person would then describe themselves to the artist, to the police artist. And so what you had there was this really cool experiment where side by side, the pictures that the police artists drew of the person were vastly different. And you could see, when you put these pictures side by side, you invariably found that the women's perception of themselves came out to look like, much less pleasing, much less beautiful pictures, right? Now, when described by friends or an acquaintance or loved one, their pictures were, much more open, much more, just they exuded more joy, more radiance, more beauty, right? And so the takeaway is that there's something going on, like there's some kind of barrier, right? Whether it's the skin, the brain, the skull, whatever, there's a barrier there. There's a wall that separates someone's perception of themselves from the actual world and how others perceive them. And seeing that play out over a week in the Iboga Retreat Center is just a fascinating process, especially because at the first part of the week when they finally open up and they tell their story around the fire and you hear about the pain and the suffering and the unforgiving moments that they've had and, the hope that they still hold for the future, you find that it's almost kind of shocking how off, how different my perception of someone can be. It's still the same person. So both perceptions are accurate. The way they see themselves is accurate and the way I see them is totally accurate as well. But it's amazing to see how far off these descriptions can be. But it's even more amazing to see how quickly these visions can align, because I think that with my experience with plant medicines, one of the greatest virtues of these medicines, be it ayahuasca or iboga or even psilocybin mushrooms, for example, like these experiences, I believe, like the number one major takeaway is that they can offer a person a much better, brighter, successful, happier, joyful vision of themselves. So in these entheogenic states, in these psychedelic states of mind, these altered states of consciousness, people are given it's driven by some kind of spiritual context or spiritual vibration or undercurrent that triggers within them the ability to see themselves as they never have before, to see themselves as being capable of finding love, being capable of being happy, of
being capable of being successful and, having fortune and happy relationships and all this kind of stuff. And I think from my own experience, that right there is perhaps the most profound and deepest, most practical, applicable message that is ingrained in these shamanic plant medicines, is how you look at yourself is not necessarily your fault, right? You didn't deliberately develop your self-identity. Your self-identity was developed over the course of a lifetime. And then, in the cases of many people I've worked with and know, like some people's childhoods, for example, are very traumatic, whether it's sexual abuse, physical abuse, or just being in a home where the parents are fighting all the time, where, like a broken, unhappy home, or even economic stress, or even far out things like being raised in a third world country and having to, like seek refuge from war and famine and these sorts of things. But we don't necessarily like choose our self-identity. It sort of gets created as we go along. But we do have more control over that self-identity than we realize, or that we are ever taught or ever learn about. So culturally speaking, in the West here, we don't really apply the tools and the knowledge that we understand about building healthy people into education, for example. Kids don't grow up meditating and looking inward and, in order to discover that there's a vastness of openness within themselves, and they don't necessarily see that. So we get bogged down, and our self-identity is formed around things that happen to us in high school or middle school, or people that screw us over, or or whatever these external circumstances are. And then we wake up one day as an adult and realize that we're not happy, right? Life isn't as good as it should be, right? We deserve to live a happier life. What the hell is going on here? And with like plant medicines, like the ability to totally rewrite in a single night, rescript that vision that you have of yourself, to retrain your mind to look at yourself first with love and acceptance and understanding, and also excitement and a promise for the future, right? And potential, right? It's how the mind works, but we don't necessarily have a way of triggering this transformation, in our standard cultural, paradigm that we have. But these medicines actually allow us to go in and see ourselves from a different perspective, see ourselves, with a clean slate, right? Look at our past and like wipe the slate clean. Look at our future and see ourselves as beings involved in our own future where anything is possible. And so that's kind of one of the things I wanted to touch on today. Like I said, I am in a transition phase here with both my website, wakingtimes.com, and with this podcast, Redesigning Reality, really trying to nail down where it's going to go in the future. And so for today, I just wanted to touch upon that one idea that kind of really sunk in, that kind of really hit home for me when I was in Costa Rica this last month, and talk about the importance of the vision that the importance of the way that you see yourself, And I'm going to talk about more on that in the future, but like I said, I want to keep this kind of short, kind of figuring out this new format, and going to dive into some of this in more detail in other shows. But for now, welcome to Redesigning Reality, the podcast, the reboot, I guess you could say. And thank you to whoever you are for tuning in. I know that there are many great and fascinating things to come. I just got to find my groove here, and with your help, I will do that. So much love, and peace out, everyone, until I do this again. Ciao.
You've been listening to Redesigning Reality with Jeff Anthony and Dylan Charles.
Tukabaya mokabuli.